Everyone laughed at her call sign, a soft, fragile name that didn't belong in the brutal skies of combat, but when the radio crackled and her jet roared to life, the laughter died instantly, because in the next few minutes, the battlefield would witness something no one would ever forget, and if you love intense military stories filled with courage, emotion, and shocking twists, make sure to subscribe now, because this story will stay with you long after the final word. Everyone laughed at her call sign, Sparrow, a name that sounded too small, too fragile, too gentle for a fighter pilot in the deadliest Air Force unit in the world. And from the moment Lieutenant Aria Vale stepped into the briefing room of Falcon Strike Squadron, she could feel the weight of judgment pressing against her ribs like invisible hands, the snickers hidden behind coffee mugs, the sideways glances, the whispers that followed her through metal hallways and across concrete runways where jets screamed into the sky like mechanical beasts, because Sparrow didn't sound like a predator, it sounded like prey. And in a world where pilots carried call signs like Reaper, Viper, Ghost, and Titan, her name felt like a cruel joke. A reminder of the tragic accident that had taken her older brother, the legendary pilot Falcon 1, whose dying radio transmission had ended with the broken whisper, "Watch over her, my little sparrow," words that her squadron commander, Colonel Briggs, had quietly used as her call sign during training, never expecting she'd wear it into real combat, and yet here she was, standing straight in her flight suit, helmet under her arm, heart pounding but eyes steady. Determined not to show the fear and grief still stitched into her soul, because she had trained her entire life for this moment, waking before dawn, running until her lungs burned, studying flight manuals until the letters blurred, pushing her body through G-forces that made veterans vomit, also she could sit inside the cockpit her brother once ruled, but no amount of training prepared her for the loneliness of being underestimated. For the sting of laughter when she walked past, for the quiet bets placed on how long she'd last before washing out, and yet she stayed silent, because silence was her armor, and the sky was where she spoke. And the moment the emergency alarm screamed through the base like a wounded animal, everything changed, boots thundered, chairs scraped, radios crackled. And the massive digital screen flashed red as intelligence poured in about a surprise enemy assault targeting a remote Allied city trapped behind mountainous terrain. A kill zone of radar traps and missile batteries that had already forced 2 squadrons to abort, and as commanders barked orders and pilots sprinted toward their jets, Arya slid into the cockpit of her F-35. Fingers steady despite the storm raging inside her chest, and when her call sign echoed across the radio, "Sparrow, your wing 4, stay tight, don't deviate," she caught the familiar edge of doubt in the voice, but she answered calmly, "Copy that," and pushed the throttle forward, feeling the jet surge beneath her like a living thing, and as the formation lifted into the burning horizon, the world shrank to instruments, airspeed, altitude, and the endless blue above. Until the first missile warning blared, a shriek that sliced through the cockpit, and chaos erupted as enemy radar locked onto the formation, flares bursting, countermeasures deploying, pilots shouting over one another, and through it all, Sparrow stayed silent, calculating angles, trajectories, distances, noticing what others missed, a narrow radar shadow between 2 peaks that could thread them past the missile grid, and when the lead pilot hesitated, frozen by uncertainty, she broke protocol, her voice slicing through the panic, "Falcon lead, follow me now," and for a split second, the radio went dead, then the commander snapped, "Negative, Sparrow, hold position," but she was already diving. Jet screaming as she plunged toward the mountain corridor, trusting instincts sharpened by years of grief and relentless training, and in that instant, every pilot in the squadron had a choice: stay safe and fail the mission, or follow the girl they mocked, and one by one, they rolled in behind her, threading the needle through sheer cliffs and swirling cloud, missiles exploding harmlessly against rock walls behind them, until they burst through into clear air above the trapped city, where enemy bombers circled like vultures, and without hesitation, Sparrow accelerated, locking onto the lead bomber. Her missiles streaking forward in blazing arcs that tore through hostile aircraft, turning the sky into fire and thunder, and as the rest of the squadron engaged, something shifted, Voices that once dripped with doubt now followed her commands without question, because her maneuvers were flawless, her timing surgical, her awareness almost supernatural, guiding them through ambushes, avoiding traps, saving wingmen whose lives flickered on the edge of extinction, until the final enemy jet attempted escape, diving low towards civilian zones, and Sparrow chased it alone, pushing past redline, body straining against crushing G-forces. Vision tunneling, pain slicing through her spine, but she refused to pull back, because she remembered her brother's voice, his promise to protect, and with a final calculated burst, she fired. The enemy jet erupting in a silent bloom of light that reflected off her visor like a sunrise, and as she pulled up, chest heaving, hands trembling, the radio remained silent for several long seconds, until Falcon Lead finally spoke, voice rough, stripped of arrogance, "Sparrow, you just saved every one of us," and in that moment, miles above the earth, with smoke trailing behind her wings and the city safe below, Arya Vale understood that sometimes the smallest names carried the strongest storms, and that laughter was only the echo before destiny answered. As the squadron turned homeward through thinning clouds and fading contrails, the adrenaline slowly drained from Sparrow's veins, replaced by a hollow ache that pulsed behind her eyes and down her spine. The silent aftermath of pushing her body beyond safe limits, and yet even as exhaustion crept in, her mind refused rest, replaying every second of the mission, every near miss, every decision that could have ended in disaster. Until the runway lights of the base appeared beneath them like a glowing river, and one by one the jets descended, wheels screaming against concrete, engines winding down into low mechanical growls, and when Arya finally climbed out of her cockpit, legs shaky, helmet tucked beneath her arm, she found the entire squadron waiting, not with laughter or smirks, but with an uneasy stillness, eyes following her every step, and for the first time since she arrived. No one moved out of her way because they didn't want to be near her, but because they didn't know how to approach her anymore, as if the fragile image they'd built had shattered, revealing something vast and dangerous underneath. And Colonel Briggs broke the silence, his weathered face tight with emotion as he walked toward her, stopping inches away, studying her like he was seeing her for the first time. Before slowly raising his hand in a crisp salute that echoed across the hangar, a gesture so rare and personal that every pilot straightened instinctively, and then, one after another, they followed, salutes snapping into the air. And Arya stood frozen, stunned by the weight of it, her throat closing, chest tightening, until Briggs finally spoke, voice low and steady, "You disobeyed orders, violated protocol, and risked the entire formation," and for a heartbeat, dread surged through her, but then he continued, "And because of that, you saved an entire city and brought every pilot home alive," and something in his eyes softened, "Your brother would be proud," words that struck deeper than any missile. And before she could respond, emergency sirens wailed again, sharper this time, more urgent, and a technician sprinted across the tarmac shouting that a classified drone feed had just gone live, revealing a massive enemy buildup deep inside restricted airspace, a strike force assembling around a prototype stealth weapon capable of leveling an entire coastal region in minutes. A weapon so advanced that even their best intelligence agencies barely understood its capabilities, and as the pilots rushed back into the briefing room, the mood shifted from triumph to dread, because this wasn't just another mission. It was a potential catastrophe, and when the holographic display lit up, showing a heavily fortified canyon complex bristling with anti-aircraft systems, underground bunkers, and radar arrays woven together like a spider's web, a murmur rippled through the room, veterans exchanging grim looks, knowing the odds, knowing what it would take, and when Briggs announced that the operation would require a single jet to penetrate the canyon alone, fly dark, disable the core targeting system, and transmit coordinates for a full-scale strike, the room fell into stunned silence, because everyone understood what that meant, a solo run through the deadliest airspace on the planet. With survival measured in seconds, and before anyone else could speak, Arya stepped forward, voice calm, unwavering, "I'll do it," and for a moment, Briggs simply stared at her, conflict etched across his features. Because he had already lost one pilot from that family, and the thought of losing another carved a visible wound in his composure, but time was against them, and the strategic necessity was undeniable, so he nodded slowly, issuing rapid instructions as technicians prepped Sparrow's jet for a stealth configuration, stripping it of non-essential weight, loading experimental countermeasures, uploading terrain maps so detailed they bordered on impossible. And as Arya suited up once more, she felt the familiar echo of her brother's presence, as if his memory sat beside her, steadying her breath, reminding her why she flew, and when she taxied toward the runway alone. The vast emptiness of the sky ahead pressed down on her like an ocean, radio silent, engines humming, and as she launched, slipping into the darkness beyond radar detection, she crossed into enemy territory under the cover of night, guided only by starlight and the faint glow of digital instruments, threading between mountain spines and jagged cliffs that loomed like black giants, and with every mile, the threat grew heavier. Enemy signals brushing against her sensors like invisible fingers, probing, searching, until the canyon opened before her, a colossal wound carved into the earth, its depths alive with flickering lights, moving shadows, and the hum of massive machinery, and Sparrow descended, throttling back, flying so low her wings nearly kissed the rock walls, heart hammering as anti-aircraft batteries tracked overhead, and just as she reached the central bunker's perimeter, her systems flared red, warning of an incoming stealth interceptor, a ghost jet designed to hunt down intruders, faster, deadlier, and armed with next-generation missiles, and as its silhouette emerged from the darkness, Arya realized with chilling clarity that this wasn't just a mission anymore, it was a duel, and the fate of thousands hung on which of them fell first. The enemy interceptor closed in with terrifying speed, its angular silhouette barely visible against the starless sky, and Sparrow felt the air itself tense around her jet as hostile targeting systems locked on. Alarm shrieking through her cockpit like wounded sirens, but instead of panicking, she inhaled slowly, letting years of brutal training and quiet suffering steady her hands. Diving deeper into the canyon where jagged rock formations created a maze of lethal obstacles, forcing the interceptor to follow if it wanted a clean shot, and as they plunged together, metal beasts threading a stone needle at supersonic speeds. The canyon walls blurred into streaks of black and gray, wind shear buffeting her wings, turbulence slamming her craft sideways, yet she held the line, weaving through narrow gaps, cutting throttle then surging forward, forcing her pursuer into desperate adjustments, and when the interceptor fired its first missile, the explosion ripped apart the rock face inches behind her tail, sending shards cascading into the abyss, but Sparrow rolled hard, diving vertically, flipping upside down and skimming mere meters above a hidden underground river, using the water's reflective surface to scramble enemy sensors, and in that split second of confusion, she looped back, locking onto the interceptor's heat signature, only to have her own targeting disrupted by a sudden surge of electronic interference that crackled across her instruments, corrupting data, distorting navigation, and as she struggled to regain control, a chilling realization dawned: someone had activated a classified jamming protocol from within their own command network, feeding the enemy her position, her vector, her escape routes, meaning there was a traitor inside Falcon Strike. Someone powerful, someone trusted, and the betrayal cut deeper than any missile, but there was no time to process it, because the interceptor reappeared above her, cannons blazing, tracer fire carving molten scars across the canyon walls. And Sparrow reacted purely on instinct, pulling into a brutal vertical climb that slammed her body against the seat with crushing force, vision narrowing, consciousness flickering, until the sky exploded above her and she burst free of the canyon. Stars reappearing in a dizzying swirl, and as she leveled out, she spotted the enemy jet overshooting, giving her a fleeting window, and she took it, unleashing a concentrated burst that tore through its wing, sending it spiraling downward into the darkness, a distant bloom of fire marking its end, and for a moment, the world fell eerily silent, broken only by the hum of her engine and her agate breathing, but the mission was far from over. Because deep within the canyon, the enemy superweapon pulsed to life, massive energy surges rippling through the terrain, and Sparrow dove back down, fighting through residual interference, navigating by memory and instinct alone. until she reached the central targeting tower, a towering spire of steel and reinforced composite that controlled the weapon's firing sequence, and as she aligned her jet for a precision strike, her sensors detected multiple heat signatures inside: technicians, guards, and something else, a hardened command core shielded against conventional weapons, forcing her into a near-suicidal maneuver, threading her jet through a collapsing ventilation corridor, wings scraping metal, sparks showering the cockpit, until she burst into the chamber and fired at point-blank range. The explosion ripping through the control center in a blinding flash that hurled her backward, slamming her jet into the canyon wall, systems failing, alarms screaming, flames licking across damaged panels, and as her craft spiraled, Sparrow fought for control, barely stabilizing enough to transmit the coordinates before her radio cut out, the last of her strength channeled into a single burst of data that streaked skyward toward Allied satellites, and then the world tilted. Gravity vanished, and she plummeted, ejecting mere seconds before impact, the violent blast ripping her from the cockpit and flinging her into open darkness, parachute snapping open just in time to keep her from vanishing into the abyss. And as she descended through drifting smoke and falling debris, pain flared through her ribs, shoulder, and leg, but she forced herself to stay conscious, landing hard on the narrow rock ledge far below, where she lay gasping, watching distant flashes as Allied forces began their assault, missiles raining down, the canyon erupting into controlled chaos, and as the weapon complex disintegrated, Sparrow realized she was trapped deep inside enemy territory, wounded, alone, and hunted, because if there was a traitor feeding her location, then extraction would not come easily, and the final and most dangerous chapter of her journey had only just begun.